forces are entering the key city of Kherson. This after Russian troops withdrew. A local official has confirmed the city is almost under Ukrainian control. And residents have come out into the city's central square and have raised the Ukrainian flag. I want to get straight now to Nic Robertson, who's outside Kherson. Nic, and you've already been speaking to people who I think are amazed, elated at what we're seeing. What more can you tell us about just how much control Ukrainian forces now have?
They're getting stronger and stronger control. That's what we've seen through the day. And indeed, late afternoon, we've been able to see what appear to us to be reinforcements, military reinforcements, on their way south towards Kherson. We've seen tanks, we've seen armoured personnel carriers, we've talked to troops who are very confident about the operation, who are very confident about the way that it's gone so far. They say that it's going according to plan. We talked to the residents in a town just liberated by the Ukrainian troops just yesterday. They were absolutely delighted with what the Ukrainian forces had done for them. They were waving at us when we were driving in. These people have been living under Russian control for about the last 8 months or so. The stories that they were telling us were harrowing. An old lady, a pensioner, perhaps in her 80s, told me that the Russians had threatened to kill her, threatened to bash her brains in. A young girl, 15 years old, and her mother was there as well. She told us that she'd been taken away, kidnapped by the Russians over the last few days while they were here. She said they put a bag on her head, took her to the basement of a house, beat her. They wanted to know where Ukrainian troops were, and she thought that she was going to be raped. The stories have been very difficult for people to live with here. There's a lot of emotion on the streets today. People out seeing friends, relatives, neighbours who they really haven't been able to congregate with for a long time. Very emotional reunions. But I think there's a general sense of relief, a huge relief. The city in a strange way, the town rather in a strange way, was very quiet because there's this relief, but people don't know what's going to happen next. They've been so traumatized by what they've been through recently. The past few weeks, they said the worst, with a lot of looting, the Russians stealing a lot of cars. We saw the bank had been broken into and completely trashed in the town. So it's been a very traumatizing period, and people really are only just beginning to come to terms with that sense of freedom. Very happy with a young boy who was the first one to raise the Ukrainian flag in the city as the Russians left, even he said before the Ukrainian troops arrived. And I think that's what we're getting a sense of in Kherson tonight as well. I think one of the interesting things that we've heard from the Russian troops, they said that they'd pulled all their troops out as planned and they had saved all their equipment. Well, I can tell you from what we've seen here today, the Russians absolutely have not saved all their equipment. We've seen a lot of it blown up by the side of the road, a lot of ammunition left behind and scattered. So the notion that Russia escaped without losing equipment really doesn't bear up to scrutiny of the facts on the ground, Julia.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in there, Nic. Firstly, I just want to point out what we've been showing our viewers as you've been speaking is images, video from social media. And one in particular that we were just showing was, I believe, Ukrainian troops, because they're carrying the Ukrainian flag, walking, I believe, into Kherson and being greeted by crowds of people, taking videos on social media. We're showing it again now, holding balloons, just to give our viewers a sense of how the Ukrainian forces are being greeted as they now come into what we're calling liberated territory.
Absolute euphoria, Julia. I mean, I've seen a lot of conflicts, and I can't remember a time when we drove into town and everyone was waving at us. They were out standing at the end of their driveways, if you will, by the side of the road, waving at us. And whenever they saw coming up and hugging the soldiers, well, old ladies were coming up and hugging us as well. I mean, it's very emotional to be on the receiving end of it. So these troops who have fought hard to get there, who've been in battle for so long, the soldiers we were talking to earlier, you know, speaking about months and months on the front line, and now getting this, now being able to take the territory back, now being able to liberate these people, now being able to reassure them that they're safe, and to be able to be repaid is the wrong word, but given emotion, given that real overpowering sense of thank you and of gratitude and of we appreciate what you've done. That's what we've witnessed here today, and I think this is what we're seeing in social media appearing now in Kherson. People are so relieved to have some certainty back in their lives. You know, the accounts we've been having have been Russians looting. This idea that you could go out of your house and you didn't know how you were going to be treated. A lady told us about filtration camps, that the Russians have been taking people away, beating them to try to find information out about where Ukrainian troops were. And this was a fear, an ever-present fear. The lady who told me that the Russians threatened to kill her, threatened to bash her head in, this was all predicated on trying to find out where Ukrainian troops were. This is what these people have been through over the last weeks and days. That huge level of uncertainty, that huge lack of knowledge about what tomorrow will bring. Will I even be able to go out to the shops to get the bread that I need, or whatever it is? That the idea that you have no idea what can happen because the Russians have been treating people here so badly in the past few weeks. This is all coming out now, and I think we're going to hear an awful lot more of it as Ukrainian troops really do secure these areas here.
I mean, this is just the beginning. And Nic, what you said just moments ago about your experience of being in this situation and seeing somewhere that's been a conflict zone, a war zone, liberated, and then the reaction from citizens there, and your comparison, I think, to what you've seen in the past is so vital. One of the other videos that we were just showing there was a man climbing up to tear down a billboard that clearly had Russian posters on that, and a small girl promoting that this is, or at least in Russia's eyes, Russian territory. And just to remind our viewers, this is one of 4 regions that Russia claimed to have annexed. And even now, I believe the Kremlin spokesperson's still saying this region is part of Russia. It belongs to Russia. Nic, the importance, I think, also of this moment, of the decision of Russia to pull out their troops, but are still saying, at least on the surface, look, this is part of Russia, and we've still annexed it. It's a huge humiliation, surely, for Russia. Massive humiliation. We were just in one of the checkpoint bunkers that the Russian troops had been in just 2 days ago. They'd left in such a hurry. They'd left their kettle, they'd left their milk, their spoons. They'd left in a hurry, but they'd also left behind some of their newspapers. There's pro-Russian newspapers full of propaganda that were published here and distributed among the Ukrainian citizens here, telling them about how they were all really Russians, how they were returning Russian symbols to Ukraine. All this sort of narrative that Russia has been forcing on the people here, forcing them to accept that they were part of Russia, and telling them these are the reasons that we believe it. Here are all the icons and statues and the things that are important to Russia that we think are part of Ukraine as well. And this has been, by and large, rejected by the population here, who have not at all agreed with what's been imposed on them, but have had no way to challenge it, because those that stood up and challenged the Russian authorities were often taken away, beaten. Some of them never reappeared again. We know some of them have been killed. So this is a huge humiliation for Russia to lose this. It's a humiliation for President Putin. It is a political, it is a political blow to President Putin. He's previously been seen as somebody who has a very smart and calculating strategy to make Russia great. This is what he sells to the Russian people, and what they are witnessing here, even those troops who are leaving, what they've witnessed here is that's not the case, that they haven't withdrawn necessarily to save troops and save equipment. They've been driven out by the Ukrainians. That's not a narrative President Putin wants to be alive in Russia. If his troops had stayed on here longer, there was the risk that the Ukrainians would have encircled them, that message of failure here in Ukraine would have grown bigger. So the Ukrainian officials believe that Putin cut his losses and pulled his troops out to save further embarrassment. But this, nevertheless, is a huge embarrassment and setback, and it hasn't yet
been spun satisfactorily by the Kremlin to really convince people, all people in Russia, that they got this right. They didn't, and this will be damaging.